Lord, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. I do exist, after all. And I bring you greetings from Amherst Presbyterian Church in Amherst, Virginia, where I exist every Sunday morning except this one. I also want to bring you a word of thanks from myself for welcoming me here on this particular Sunday, and especially to Eric. It was such a joy for Sarah and Charlie and I all to get in one car this morning. And of course, a broader thanks to all of you for having made our whole family feel welcome over the last couple of years, for having welcomed Sarah into this church and having welcomed me as a silent partner, and for having welcomed particularly our son Charlie into your worship life. It is a daunting thing, and maybe especially for a preacher, to know that my child's relationship with God is roughly every other week in the hands of people that I barely know. And yet I can think of no better way for him to learn about God than to feel the love and welcome that he has felt here. So you have my thanks. You have my thanks, but I have to tell you that just saying that makes me feel very old. Few things in life make me recognize the passage of time, like publicly recognizing that I have a nearly 4-year-old child. And of course, Charlie is much more than just a literary device meant to symbolize the passage of time and my mortality, but as a literary device meant to symbolize the passage of time and my mortality, he is very effective. Like I suspect all of our children do, he stands in that invisible line between the days when we dreamt about what our lives would be like when we grew up and the days of actually being grown up and dreaming instead only of what our lives might otherwise be. So we grow up and we settle down. This week, a colleague of mine had a blog post make the rounds, and she summed it up quite nicely. I've become the man, she admits. I started out wanting to fight, but I've become the man. My parents taught me about boycotts, she writes, but the last time I marched, I decided not to get arrested so that I could keep my precious TSA pre-check. So we grow up and we settle down and we trade some of the impassioned vitriol of youth for all of the cozy compromise of adulthood, and it always comes laced with loss. And you know, I love my kid to pieces, but I could do without the part where he turns into a literary device. I think the writer of our Old Testament story this morning, the story of Samuel and Eli, knows a little something about age and loss and settling down. At first glance, of course, this is a cute child story, a Sunday school story. It's the boy Samuel raised in the temple as part of the priestly order, and then this one night he starts hearing his name called in the darkness, and he doesn't know what to do about it, and it keeps happening, and finally the old high priest in the temple figures it out. Samuel's father figure figures it out, and he figures out that God is the one calling to Samuel in the night, and so begins Samuel's long journey as one of Israel's most important biblical prophets. And you know it's true because the book is named after him, and it's a two-parter, and this is the book that has David in it, but they call it the book of Samuel, so you know even at the beginning that this kid has big plans ahead of him. He's going places. But make no mistake, this isn't just Samuel's story. This isn't just a story about dreaming about days to come. It's also Eli's story, and in Eli's story, this is a story about age and loss. Eli is by this point a very old man. His two sons are priests in their own right, but in previous chapters it's quite clear that Eli's sons are corrupt through and through. In fact, his sons are held up as prime evidence that Israel has once again lost its way, and when our text opens this morning by announcing that it is a dark time in Israel and that the word of the Lord was rare and visions are not widespread, that's just the author taking pot shots at Eli and his family. And then it just bears down on him. It tells us that Eli himself had begun to lose his eyesight, and then the whole story takes place in the middle of the night with the oil lamp barely flickering in the middle of the temple. And then in a land without vision, to a man without eyesight, in a room without illumination, God shows up by speaking. Eli is desperate for visions, and God shows up with a voice, and how insulting that God would change the rules of the game completely. And the Lord calls, Samuel, Samuel. And, if you're Samuel, it's wonderful, because apparently the story needs Samuel, and because Samuel is the future, and because God isn't done with Samuel. And I'm sure Eli loves Samuel to pieces, but honestly, I think he could do without the part where the kid turns into a literary device. And the nightmare isn't over here. Of course, Samuel is living a dream, that one where God calls you in the middle of the night and has this amazing plan for your life, and the best days are yet to come. But Eli's in a nightmare, because, of course, what God tells Samuel is to promise this bitter judgment against Israel for all of her wickedness. On that day I will fulfill against Eli all that I have spoken concerning his house from beginning to end, for I have told him that I am about to punish his house forever for the iniquity that he knew, because his sons were blaspheming God and he did not restrain them. So if you're keeping score at home, that means that in this story, God, A, reveals himself differently with different technology than he did in Eli's own life. That B, what God reveals is a total destruction that Eli cannot avoid, and which is C, the destruction of his own family that Eli could never reach in the first place. All he can do is sit and watch, except, of course, that he's going blind. In some ways, this is a child's story. It is a celebration of the naivete and the wonder of meeting the world for the first time, of meeting God for the first time. But there's nothing naive about the story itself. This story knows the depths of age and loss. And for all of us who were once the generation yet to come, in our own lives or in our political lives or in our church lives, everybody here has once been the generation yet to come. And then God spoke in some new way to some new generation, and the story wasn't about us anymore, and it destroyed so much of what we hold dear. And it's not even the worst part. Here's the worst part. The worst part is that God comes along to destroy everything that Eli holds dear, and Eli has to push the button himself. Samuel can't figure it out on his own. Samuel, Samuel, God says over and over, and Samuel thinks it's the old man across the room from him, but Samuel can't figure it out. God's speaking to him, but he's too young to understand it for himself. Samuel, Samuel, and the kid says, Eli, here I am, and finally it's Eli who has to put it together. No, Samuel, that's the Lord speaking. Eli has to push the button. And I don't for a second think that he's the only gatekeeper. I'm pretty sure God wasn't going to stop calling, and I'm pretty sure Samuel would have figured it out eventually. But still, Samuel has this dream, the one where God calls you in the middle of the night and has this amazing plan for your life. And Eli doesn't have to like it. He doesn't have to want it. He doesn't have to appreciate it. But he has to let it happen. He has to push the button. He could have complained, well, it might be God calling, Samuel, but that's not how God called prophets back when I was a kid. He could have lamented, well, that might be God calling, Samuel, but I'm not sure you're going to like what he has to say. He could have roadblocked, well, Samuel, that might be God calling, let's put together a task force to figure it out. But God bless him, he just lets it happen. He lets this child dream. He knows everything it costs, and yet he lets this child dream with God. Our children dream with God. You know that, right? Our children dream with God. They dream of a world impossibly better than this one, except the only thing making it impossible is us, unless we let them dream. Their dream is not the same as the one ours once was. By definition, it is something of which we cannot fully conceive except to know the chance that it will destroy so many of the things we hold dear. They dream of God, of a church living out the Great Commission of Jesus Christ in ways none of us could ever have imagined. And if we let them dream, it may very well destroy some of the very things about church that we hold most dear. They dream with God of families and relationships and marriages defined by nothing but the abundant and forgiving love that is God's gift to each of us. And if we let them dream, our own families and relationships may be transfigured in ways beyond our imagination. They dream with God of a nation living out its first principles of justice and equality and human dignity. And if we let them dream, it may very well destroy some of the privilege and convenience that we hold most dear. So I say we have to let our children dream, but don't for a second let it sound easy. It's one of the hardest things we do. But frankly, if Eli can do it, if an old blind man in a dark room can do it, I think there's hope for us. There's a scene at the end of the new film Selma about the 1965 Civil Rights March that prompted the Voting Rights Act. It's a scene that recalls this classic moment when LBJ brings Alabama Governor George Wallace into the Oval Office to sweet-talk him and harangue him. The president wants Wallace to let blacks in Alabama register to vote just like the law says they already can, and he wants it because the last thing he wants to do is to have to pass even more legislation to make it happen. And he wants it because just then Martin Luther King's movement have put the screws on him on national television. But of course, Wallace wants no part of it. Wallace wants Alabama for the whites. He wants Alabama for his white cronies. And the last thing he wants is to take his massive thumb off of the scale of electoral politics. So here's the president, a champion for civil rights, yes, but hardly a dreamer, a realist's realist, a politician's politician, the highest priest in the land, in its highest temple, with the spoils of its corruption staring him in the face. They are dreaming elsewhere, of course. They're dreaming in Montgomery, and they're dreaming in Atlanta. They're dreaming in Selma. No one more so than the young John Lewis himself, barely a boy who led those protesters across that fateful bridge. But this Oval Office room, this room isn't home to dreamers. This room is home to a man who knows age and loss all too well. A man who knows all too well how much the dreams of others may cost him. This president who then looks Wallace in the eyes and says, well, I'll be had if I'm going to let history put me in the same place as the likes of you. And in the next cut, he's announcing the Voting Rights Act. And yes, of course, it's a movie, it's a literary device. But you're not, and I'm not. We're not literary devices, and most importantly, our children aren't either. They have dreams of their own. And even when it's too late to be Samuel, it's never too late to be Eli. It's never too late to recognize God's dreams in the dreams of those yet to come. It's never too late to be Eli, so let's let history put us in the same place as the likes of him. Amen.